In the ancient world, the breaking wheel was one of the most infamous forms of capital punishment, symbolizing the raw brutality of Roman justice. But it wasn't just the brutality that made it one of the cruelest punishments. It was the prolonged suffering that accompanied it. The victim would be strapped to a large wheel, and their limbs, often already shattered, were secured in place as the wheel was positioned. This horrifying spectacle was often carried out in front of a crowd for the entertainment and educational purposes of the Roman citizens. The execution process. The condemned person was typically beaten and tortured before being placed on the wheel. The wheel would either be positioned horizontally or vertically, and the victim would have their arms and legs broken, hence the name. Some reports suggest that victims could be left alive for hours, even days, after being broken, their bodies exposed to the elements and sometimes the animals of the arena. Roman citizens would watch the slow demise of the prisoner, knowing full well that there would be no quick escape from this torment. The punishment, while killing the victim, was also designed to humiliate them. The act of leaving someone alive in such a broken state, exposed and helpless, was meant to strip away any last semblance of dignity. The historical context. The breaking wheel wasn't just a method used for murderers, it was also applied to rebels, deserters, and those who had been seen as betraying the Roman state. It symbolized the emperor's supreme authority and Rome's refusal to tolerate disobedience. The practice was so severe that it was said to have been a method of example setting, meant not only to kill, but to destroy the spirit of the condemned, making it clear that Roman law was supreme. The social impact for the Roman citizens witnessing such a public execution served as a reminder of the empire's power and their role in maintaining order. The brutality of the breaking wheel instilled fear in the populace, ensuring they knew their place and understood the cost of rebellion. For the family of the victim, however, the punishment was a public disgrace. Being tied to a wheel, in the eyes of the Romans, was one of the most shameful ways to die, especially when inflicted upon soldiers or citizens. One of the most infamous and globally recognized forms of Roman punishment is crucifixion, a method that struck fear into the hearts of those who dared to defy Roman law. Often associated with the death of Jesus Christ, crucifixion was a common punishment in ancient Rome, used not only to execute but to humiliate, terrorize, and send a public message about the power of the empire. It was reserved for the worst offenders, slaves, rebels, and criminals, but also for political enemies, creating one of the most brutal and publicly terrifying punishments in history. The execution process. Crucifixion involved nailing or tying a person to a wooden cross and leaving them to die a slow, agonizing death. The condemned would first be flogged, often mercilessly, before being made to carry their cross through the streets to the execution site. Along the way, the prisoner was mocked and humiliated by crowds, a public spectacle that allowed Roman citizens to witness the supposed justice being done. At the execution site, the prisoner's arms were outstretched and nailed or tied to a horizontal beam, the patibulum, which was then lifted and secured onto a vertical post. The position of the body on the cross, with the arms extended, made it nearly impossible for the victim to breathe. Crucifixion didn't just kill, it tortured its victim slowly. As the body sagged, the lungs would collapse, and breathing became more and more difficult. Victims would try to push themselves up to get air, but with each breath, the pain intensified, especially from the nail-driven wounds in the hands, wrists, and feet. Death could take anywhere from a few hours to several days. The humiliation crucifixion wasn't just a punishment, it was a deeply humiliating experience. Publicly executed on the cross, the condemned was exposed to the eyes of the Roman populace. Women were often not allowed to participate in this spectacle, which was seen as particularly demeaning, but men, especially those of high status, were meant to learn from the public disgrace of the crucified. The body's exposure to the elements, its nakedness, and its deterioration served as a clear message about the power of Rome and the consequences of rebellion. The political statement. Crucifixion was often used for political purposes. When rebellious factions rose against the empire, such as the infamous Spartacus rebellion, Rome's leaders used crucifixion to crush morale. The act of placing 6,000 of Spartacus' followers on crosses along the Appian Way served as a chilling warning to others who might dare to oppose Roman rule. This form of execution was a brutal reminder that Roman law would not tolerate insurrection. The message was clear: anyone who rebelled would not only face death, but they would be publicly humiliated and destroyed. The impact on Roman society. For Roman citizens, crucifixion was a horrifying spectacle, one that reinforced the idea of Roman superiority and power. Watching a crucifixion was meant to instill fear in the populace and remind them of their place in Roman society. The crucified were often left on display for long periods, either dying slowly or being left to rot as a deterrent to others. This brutal public execution method effectively eliminated threats to the state and reinforced the Roman belief in the strength of its military and legal systems. Imagine being thrown into an arena, your only option for survival being to face the hungry beasts that are being unleashed upon you. This is exactly what the damnatio ad bestias, condemnation to beasts, punishment entailed in ancient Rome. A spectacle that was both terrifying and cruel, damnatio ad bestias was designed to entertain the Roman people while also serving as a grim punishment for those who were seen as a threat to Roman order. What is damnatio ad bestias? Damnatio ad bestias was a type of execution reserved primarily for criminals, prisoners of war, and early Christians who were seen as threats to the state. The punishment involved throwing the condemned into the arena to fight wild animals, such as lions, tigers, bears, and leopards, or being devoured by them. In some cases, the prisoners were not even given the chance to defend themselves. Instead, they were left to face the beasts with no weapons, sometimes chained or bound in place, ensuring that they could not escape. The public spectacle. The Romans loved blood sports, and the Colosseum in Rome was the ultimate venue for such gruesome entertainments. Thousands of people would gather to watch condemned criminals meet their end in brutal fashion, often cheering on the animals as they tore their victims apart. These spectacles were designed to serve two purposes: to provide entertainment for the masses, and to send a clear message about the power of the Roman Empire. The idea was to show the consequences of defying Roman law, and to emphasize the might of Rome's military and justice system. The execution would typically take place in the grand amphitheaters, with the condemned thrown into the center of the arena. As the crowd roared, wild animals would be unleashed to chase down the prisoner. The animals, trained for these bloody contests, were often starved prior to the event to increase their hunger and ferocity. The spectacle was meant to showcase the brutality of the Roman Empire, and it was not uncommon for the prisoner to be slaughtered within moments of the animals being released. The type of victims. The victims of damnatio ad bestias were often those who had committed serious offenses or had been considered enemies of the state. Criminals, slaves, gladiators who had fallen out of favor, and even early Christians who refused to renounce their faith were often subjected to this horrific form of execution. The punishment was a powerful deterrent for those who might consider challenging the authority of the empire. For instance, early Christians were frequently sentenced to die by damnatio ad bestias as a way to silence them and eradicate their religious movement. These executions were meant to demonstrate the full power of Roman law over those who refused to worship the Roman gods or acknowledge the divine status of the emperor. The psychological impact on Roman society. The public spectacle of damnatio ad bestias also had a psychological effect on the Roman population. These brutal executions were meant to instill fear and remind citizens of the consequences of defying the state. The fear of being thrown into the arena and facing the beasts was a constant reminder of Rome's ruthless justice system. People were reminded daily of what could happen if they broke the law, which helped to maintain control over the population. The animals used in damnatio ad bestias were not just any wild beasts. They were carefully selected and sometimes trained for these gruesome tasks. Lions, bears, tigers, and even crocodiles were brought from all corners of the empire to entertain the masses. The animals themselves were often forced into captivity, trained to fight, and then starved to increase their aggression before being unleashed on the condemned. The most famous of these animals were the venatores, gladiators who specialized in hunting and fighting wild beasts. These men were highly trained to handle animals in combat and would sometimes enter the arena as part of the spectacle, hunting the beasts and even fighting them in one-on-one battles. However, when it came to damnatio ad bestias, there was no room for victory for the condemned. The beasts would always be given the advantage.